So, but the New Testament, this is really where the meat is. Okay, so what about the New Testament? All right, I told you there's over 5,700. There's actually the number's closer to 58 now. So 5758, we could go with 5,800. New Testament manuscript copies. Those are just the Greek, the ones that the original guys would have written and it was copied. Now then, here's that guy I told you, Dr. James White. Here's an analysis he did, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Those manuscripts make up of more than 2 million pages of text. 2 million pages. So think of a book and there's 2 million pages. All right, out of that, I told you there's 200 to 400,000 variants. Okay? But here's the context of those variants. Yes, there's more variants, but there is more to the story. The variants in the New Testament, 99% of variants do not change meaning. That's the key with those variants. So when they analyze them 200 to 400,000 variants, 99% of them don't have any impact on the meaning of the scriptures. None whatsoever. So that means 99% of them do not say things like, Jesus is Lord, and then they say, no, he's not, he's just a guy. That would be changing in meaning, as if you had one manuscript trying to promote Jesus as divine, but another one saying, no, he really is just literally a human, there's nothing divine about him, he just did some miracles like Moses. He's no different than Moses. Well, they would be opposing one another. That's not what these variants do. The 99% of them, again, as I said, are spelling and word order. Now, but that still leaves 1%. What about the 1%? And let's use the high number of 400,000 variants. It gets classified as meaningful variants. Now, meaningful mean we need to look at them a little bit more because there's something different than simply a spelling change. There could be more to it. However, so that means 4,000 variants now. So again, let me back up. Let's use the high number. 4,000 total variances in all these manuscripts. Sounds like a big number. But only 4,000 of them mean anything. Meaning you need to look at them for a minute and let's figure it out. But compare 4,000 to 400,000, I mean, is that not a small number? You're really shrinking down. If I left it at, we have 400,000 variants in the manuscripts, oh my goodness, I can't believe my Bible anymore. But wait a minute. Only 4,000 of those we're considering meaningful. They do a little bit more than word order or spelling. You might could argue, well, but that's still 4,000. That's a high number. What about that? It's going to keep whittling down. So that means 138,000 words, or 2.9% of the words in the New Testament, are a meaningful variant. However, out of those 4,000, only roughly half, 2,000 of them, are considered viable. Okay, now viable means they think when they examine all these, okay, yes, these are opposing here, and we need to look at that. We need to figure out why. So here's how this happens. Let me back up again. Remember our process of their copying. Well, what happens is if let's use the name Bono, our church. Okay, so Bono, it becomes a hub for sending out copies of Scripture throughout the churches in the South. Then let's say a brother from Ohio visits, and he thinks it's awesome what we're doing, and he says, I want to make that happen in the churches for the North. Okay, cool. So we give him some copies of our stuff. So he heads up to the northern parts of the country, and their churches up there do the same thing Bono's doing. Bono's become like this hub for spinning out manuscripts in the South to the churches. And now then there's another church in Ohio spinning them out in the North. So what would happen over time is you sort of have two different channels of manuscripts being sent out. Do you get what I'm saying? So you got two different channels there. Well, as those are getting copied, you're going to have some errors or some mistakes, or people are being intentional maybe even and sneaking in stuff. So over time then, let's let that happen for 500 years. Okay, well now then when we analyze this, you're going to have the northern manuscripts might say a verse one way. The southern manuscripts say it another way. That would be called a viable variant, because these manuscripts in the north are saying Jesus is Lord, and the one in the south is, it's not that it's not saying he's not Lord, but it's saying it in a different way. And it's clearly not just spelling issues. It's that it actually is saying something different. And so then you start to say, well, okay, something's going on because the northern manuscripts say it this way, the southern manuscripts say it this way. Does that make some sense? I hope so. I'm trying not to get too in the weeds here. So that's a viable variant, though. You need to really study that one because it does show that they're talking differently. Okay? So out of all of the 400,000, you're only left with roughly 2,000 that you can say, these need some examination. What's going on? They don't exactly line up. But I stress to you, that's 2,000 out of 4,000. That is, by definition, okay, that is a statistically insignificant number. That shouldn't even matter. So the New Testament then is remarkable with its trustworthiness. And here's a summary why. Out of those 5,800 New Testament manuscripts, they all agree with each other in 99% of the time. I mean, just think about if there's a room of 20 of us and someone copies down a piece of paper and they pass it the copy and they keep copying. What are the odds that 99% it matches? Someone's going to make a mistake because someone writes different, someone wrote in cursive, someone wrote in caps, someone wrote, and so they were confused on how they said it, and they assumed that he spelled it this way, but it was a different word or whatever. Do you kind of get the idea? But imagine doing this now with thousands of people over a longer period of time, and you still line up 99% of the time. That, to me, becomes fascinating. The copies are a great thing for proving the New Testament is true. That means that we know we don't need the original copies, or else how could we have over 57 or 5,800 copies that agree 99% of the time? Again, someone would say to me, and it rattled my cage at first, well, you don't even have the original letters that Paul wrote. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. How can I even know what Paul wrote if I don't have the original? Because of this process. Because you have over 5,000, 57, 5,800 copies of the New Testament that 99% of the time agree, there should be no question. Like that's it, case closed. I know what they wrote because here I have all these copies that by human reason they should all be mixed up and saying one thing and another, but they don't do that. 99% of the time they agree. So that is very, very fascinating. And this isn't even counting when we look at the Latin and some of the others. So we're not even going there, but I just want to throw out to you, it gets even better, but we're just looking at the Greek. Now, what does this all mean? Okay, well, this means that your Bible is trustworthy because you've got roughly 25,000 ancient manuscripts or pieces of manuscripts. Now, when I'm saying 25,000, I'm adding up all the languages besides Greek. So you've got all of these thousands of manuscripts there, Greek, Latin, and some others, that match 99% of the time. This makes it a sure thing to know that you have the right Bible that the apostles actually wrote, because you have so many, you can easily see where there are errors or fakes. You have more manuscripts, so by definition, you're going to get more variance. Someone shared that with me, and that's when the light went on. That 400,000 is actually logical. It's not a problem. Because think about it. If you make a copy of something and you have one copy, ever, one copy of this book, how many variants is that one copy going to have from the original? A couple, right? But if you've got thousands of copies, isn't it logical sense that just means there's more opportunity for more variants? So that's actually logical. It's not a problem. It's going to happen. The question becomes not how many variants do we have, it's are they meaningful or not? That's the issue. It really doesn't matter if you had 1 million variants. The question would be, but out of the 1 million differences in all the manuscripts, how many or what percentage of them actually mean something to where it would change our beliefs or our doctrine? That would be the challenge. But I'm trying to stress to you, out of all of that, 99% agree, there's 1%, by definition, that is statistically insignificant. It should not even be a problem at all. I do want to give you an example of what is meant by a viable variant. Okay? 1 Timothy 3:16, if you own a King James Version, that's on the right side. 1 Timothy 3:16 says this, "And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh." The King James Version says, "God was manifested in the flesh." On the left side is a newer translation called the ESV, English Standard Version. I underlined what it says. Now it says, "Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. He was manifested in the flesh." Now this is what they're meaning by, okay, this is a viable variant. Because one manuscript channel that the King James comes from outright says, God was manifest in the flesh. And we all know who that's talking about, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, come in flesh. But another manuscript channel that's also considered equally significant does not say God. It says the word He. So the argument would go like this if you're spinning it. Well, the King James is, it was more done by, King James. It's called King James. He didn't do it, but it was under his sort of reign there. So the argument would go, well, look, the church fabricated Jesus being God. Jesus was never God. He was just a man. He did a lot of great things. He was obviously gifted by God, but he was not God. So the argument would go, it's a conspiracy. Some translations, like the King James, throughout time, they put these things in there. No, excuse me, I'm saying that wrong. The King James didn't put it in there. The manuscript channel that it comes from is what I'm trying to say. So back to my north-south example. Let's say the King James Bible in English is translated from the Northern Manuscript family of manuscripts, okay? And it says God. In 1 Timothy 3:16, it says God came in the flesh, or God was manifested in the flesh. But the Southern Manuscript family that some other translations come from in English, well, it doesn't say God, it says He. That can sound weird if you spin it in a way of like, well, look, the Northern people just really love Jesus because they were trying to make Him to be God, but you people in the South clearly just thought of Him as a man because you said He. You didn't call Him God. That's how it gets spun. But as Jimmy and Ricky are saying, to me, even if you read in context, you know who Paul's talking about. I don't have to have Paul tell me God manifests in the flesh. I can read He was manifested in the flesh to know who he's talking about. He's talking about Jesus. And I would furthermore argue, okay, you could say, yeah, but the ESV doesn't say God, so how do you know then that Paul meant for Jesus to be considered God? Okay, if we leave 1 Timothy and look at Romans and, quite frankly, any other letter in the New Testament, it will tell you Jesus was divine. I don't have, my doctrine of Jesus being God does not hinge on 1 Timothy 3:16, is the point I'm trying to make. So I look at this and say, yes, it's a variant, but so what? This doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change my doctrine. Now, if all I had was the book of 1 Timothy, that's different. But we have a whole New Testament, right? And all throughout it teaches Jesus is God. So I don't have to have it here. And even the ESV, if you look at the footnote, I have an arrow. Some modern Bible translations like the ESV, they will show you on the same page, hey, this verse here has a variant. And that's what it's doing with this footnote. It's telling you 1 Timothy 3:16, Greek, who, some manuscripts, God. So they're just telling you with a simple footnote, hey, our translation, we believe that the right manuscripts that Paul really wrote, he meant to say He manifests in the flesh. But they're still doing you justice to say there are some manuscripts, though, that say God manifests in the flesh. So to me, if it's a conspiracy, then how can we be so open about this? Like we're showing you, right? Like some say this, some say that. Just take it however you want, but it doesn't change the meaning. The bigger variants, I mentioned them last week. The two biggest ones probably would be the first part of John 8 and the ending of Mark. The first part of John 8, the woman caught in adultery, most scholars do believe that's probably not original, and that's a whole other story why that they think that. Because it shows up way later on in time. And all the manuscripts before a certain point in time do not have the story of the woman caught in adultery where they were asking Jesus who should throw the first stone. Do y'all remember that story? And Jesus wrote on the ground and they went away. So that shows up like hundreds of years later, all of a sudden it's in all these manuscripts, but before that time, it's not in any. So that leads them to say that's probably something that happened later on, where it was put in there. The second one is Mark, the ending of Mark. So a lot believe that Mark cuts off shorter than what some Bibles will keep going. If you have a King James Bible, and a New King maybe, it will give you no notes, which is fine. I'm not saying that's wrong. But it will give you no notes, typically no notes. It'll just have Mark go all the way through. The stuff where Jesus talks about they'll drink poison and not die, stuff like that. More modern translations will keep the verses. They'll have them, typically. But they'll have another footnote. They'll say, most manuscripts stop with Mark here. And it's sort of for you to see it. You can see both sides. But that begs the question, okay, why is that? Well, I looked into this too, and here's what typically they believe happened. So let's take the woman caught in adultery, for example. How could that story show up later on? The reason that they don't believe that's authentic, and I'm not an expert in this, okay? I'm somewhat convinced that it may not be, but my argument goes back to, who cares? Nowhere in that story did Jesus claim things like, I'm God, to where it would make you say, oh, if I don't have that story, I can't believe in Jesus. It's just a neat story about an event Jesus had with the Pharisees. If it's not in the Bible, my argument is, so what? Now, Mark, Mark, that's really odd because I don't want to drink poison and test that out, so I'm okay with that stuff in Mark not being in there. It doesn't really change my view of Christ. But how could that happen, you may wonder? Well, they believe it happened in some pretty common ways, because if you have the story of the woman caught in adultery, okay, let's say that when I say not meant to be in the Bible, I'm saying that probably in a bad way. What I mean by that is, John himself probably did not write that in the Gospel of John. That does not mean, however, that story isn't real. You see the difference? That story could be true. That may have really happened. But it doesn't mean that John himself originally wrote that in the first run of the Gospel of John. What they believe happened is, and I'm moderately convinced of it, the story may be real. That's fine. No problem with the story, whether it's real or not. But what probably happened is, it wasn't original to John, but what happened is the story's being told, though. People are talking about, hey, you remember that time when Jesus and the Pharisees, and they tried to trick him with the woman caught in adultery, and he did this? The story gets told and told and told. Well, throughout time then, let's take a pastor. How many pastors have you heard, and they're preaching from the Bible, and they give an illustration? Or they'll say, it's like that one time when, and they tell a little story. Or they'll say, this here in the Bible, it doesn't say this, but I get the picture that this is probably what they were feeling, or this is what was happening. I mean, preachers, right? Like, we'll ad lib, or we'll throw in we're not adding to the scriptures. I hope you get what I'm saying. Like, we're sharing side information in sermons, right? What they believe happened is, which was known to happen from scribes. Okay, so someone's in church, and they're hearing a sermon back in their day, and the pastor may have said, hey, it's kind of like that time when Jesus was asked about the woman caught in adultery, and here's what he did. And he told this legend that may be true, but may have not actually been written in John's gospel. And so someone hears it, and maybe they write a note. They're a note taker. And they're writing down what the pastor said, and they're writing some notes here. What do you think is possible could happen accidentally? If like some notes are being written down, and then you're discovering manuscripts over time, or you're passing things down. Let me add a little more to the story. So let's say our friend from the north comes to visit our church a week later. He says, hey, is your local librarian here, your scribe? I'd like to see what copies y'all have. Oh yeah, we have this copy of John. So I don't have that one. Let me look at it. And he's looking, and he wants to copy it. Well, he sees out to the side some notes that the scribe wrote. They're not the scriptures, right? They're notes that he might, like a commentary or something. You got study Bibles, right? They have in the bottom, kind of like that. So he's kind of writing some notes. Well, what could mistakenly happen is they thought, oh, like that's original. That was what John wrote. No, it wasn't what John wrote. It was what the scribe might have notated that they heard. And so the reason they say that is because it doesn't show up for a certain amount of time. And then when it does show up in the manuscripts, it's not always in John 8. It shows up in different portions of Scripture. So what they think is someone thought it was Scripture. I mean, it sounds like something Jesus would do, let's be honest. And they're kind of like trying to maybe find, well, where does it belong? And so it settled on John 8. Now, I say that to you to say this, okay? That does not erode my faith in the Bible. Because we have all this evidence to show us here's what the Bible is and here's what it says. And let's say we have instances like this where, I mean, maybe this paragraph shouldn't be there or not. That in no way, I keep wanting to stress to you guys, the woman caught in adultery, whether it was supposed to be in John or not, that doesn't affect any part of your Christian life. I mean, it shouldn't. It should have no bearing on whether or not you have faith in Jesus. Now, if I said to you, well, you know all the crucifixion stories, they're not sure they're real. Well, that's a different ballgame. I mean, that's our faith. There's nothing about this that should challenge faith, though. This means your Bible has the most manuscripts of any work in history. Therefore, it only makes sense that it's going to have more variance. However, only 1% are viable, need examination. Out of a book that large, that's statistically insignificant. The Bible has an overabundance of manuscripts for us to know with certainty we have the original words of the authors. Real quick, and I'll end on this, okay? Let me compare the New Testament to other books of history. Has anyone ever heard of Plato? Okay, you might have had to read some Plato in school and some of your Greek literature. So Plato, his work was written around 400 BC, but we only currently have 7 manuscripts of Plato. 7. And how many did I tell you we have in the New Testament? We have 7 of Plato, okay? The earliest dated copy of Plato is around the year 8 to 900 AD, not BC. Okay, that's 1,200 years after Plato lived and died that we have the first copy of a work of Plato, and we only have 7 of them. New Testament copies have been found, portions, to as close to 60 to 100 AD, with over 5,700 copies. You see a big difference. Okay, we'll keep going here. Entire complete New Testament copies have survived from late 3rd and early 4th century. That is less than 300 years from the time of the original apostles. Complete New Testament. I stress that because you may be like me. When I first heard this, I thought, man, but it would be awesome if we had copies of the New Testament from like right when John was living or Paul was living. Yes, that would be. But I want to stress something else though. Compare the Bible to the rest of ancient books from history, and the Bible is in a league of its own. Do we have copies that go back to when Paul actually lived? No. But when I have more of this information and I'm looking here, we don't have to have that. And in fact, when you look at other works like Plato, they're in a far worse state than the Bible. You've got Plato here with copies not discovered until 1,200 years after he lived, but we have portions of the New Testament to within 100 years. And we have complete New Testaments to within 300 years. Big difference, right? Here's a chart. I gave you the chart. It might be a little hard to see. I showed it to the youth. They loved it. I like to show it to people when we talk about this. It's a chart a guy did named Mark Berry. I do not know Mr. Berry. It's from 2010, so I would imagine after 11 years it's probably changed. I would argue for the better because we keep discovering more. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, it validated even more. But here's what this chart is showing. The very, very middle black dot where all the lines are coming out from. That's like our point of origin, okay? Now from there, you have yellow circles. These yellow circles represent a different book from history or writer from history. The New Testament, we have Homer. Everyone heard of Homer? The Iliad and the Odyssey, some of that Greek stuff again. Homer, Aristotle, Sophocles, Tacitus. Some guys here, their names I'm not pronouncing. Plato, I mentioned earlier. Pliny. We got some Roman guys, some Greek guys in here. These are books that I've had to read, not all of them at one point in school. Your kids, grandkids probably had to, or you may have had to. I don't ever recall anyone questioning, hey, I'm going to assign you to read Aristotle here. But by the way, we know that's not what he really wrote. But I want you to read it anyways. I don't remember anyone ever questioning a book I was assigned to read from classic literature being false. Never ever do I recall that. For Plato, Aristotle, for any of these guys, I've never heard, maybe people do, but I was never fed information that was trying to put doubt in my mind about, I just don't assign classic literature in my class because we know we can't prove that they really wrote it, so we're not even going to go there. You get what I'm saying? But the big yellow circle on the left that looks like the sun, guess which book that represents? The New Testament. Just the New Testament. The size of the circle is the number of manuscripts compared to the other works of history. So it has the most manuscripts attesting to what it originally said, and look how close it is to the center. The center is the gap of time from when those people actually wrote it originally till the first manuscripts we have discovered. So when you compare the two together, if you were to look at the chart, it's telling you that we have 24 to 25,000 total New Testament manuscripts that date anywhere from, I'll say 60 to 100. The chart says 40 to 70, but we could be conservative. 60 to 100 AD, or 60 to 100 years from when they first wrote it. Okay, that is a short window from when they wrote it to when we have manuscripts. And then you have a mass amount of number. Compare that to the second runner-up, which is Homer's Iliad. We have 663 copies that date to within 500 years from when it was supposedly written. I've never heard anyone, when I was assigned Homer, say, this is a work from Homer called the Iliad, which, oh, by the way, let me fill you with all this doubt that he never really existed and he never really wrote this. I was never told that. But the Bible is a completely opposite story. Like, we don't know that they really wrote that. We don't know that they said that. We don't know that it's true. But you just look at a chart like this and you're like, this doesn't make any sense. If you're not going to question these guys on the right side, why are you questioning the big ball of the sun on the left side? It stands on its own. I will stop right there. We're at time. And what we'll do next week, we will pick up with the bigger one. Do we know we have the right book? So I believe we can finish it next week. We will look at, do we have the right books? How do we know? And we'll look at some fulfilled prophecies in some ways that we can say, hey, the Bible really is a very unique book that appears to be divinely authored. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been helpful to you. If it has, please consider liking and sharing the video and subscribing to the channel. Join us next time as we begin to answer, do we have the right books in the Bible?